The day the ancient dragons bowed before him, Mason Reed's hands were still streaked with dried mud from the royal stables. 7 colossal heads lowered in perfect unison, a sight no human had witnessed in over 8,000 years. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're tuning in from. I love hearing from you. It keeps this channel alive. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one. For 17 years, Mason was nothing more than a stable boy in the kingdom of Tylon, sleeping on hay bales and dreaming of adventures that always seemed out of reach. But that spring morning, when the shadows of 7 great dragons swept across the royal courtyard, his world changed forever. The day had begun like any other. Before sunrise, Mason was already at work in the stables, home to 36 royal horses, each worth more than he could ever earn in a lifetime. He took pride in his chores, though the knights and nobles never missed a chance to remind him he was just a servant, the lowest rung of Tylon's strict hierarchy. "Boy, you missed a spot," barked Knight Commander Garrett, his voice sharp as his polished armor. He kicked over a bucket of clean water with deliberate cruelty. "Do it again. Properly." His smirk glinted in the morning light before he strutted off. Mason bit his tongue. He knew better than to answer back. At 17, he was tall but lean, with sandy hair that constantly fell into his eyes. His clothes were patched in a dozen places, but he kept them clean, one of the few bits of dignity he still had. "Don't let him get to you," came a voice. It was Ree, the falconer's daughter, 16, with fierce hazel eyes and a braid that never came undone no matter how hard she worked. "My father says Garrett was born with a silver spoon, shoved somewhere unpleasant." Mason couldn't help but laugh. Ree just shrugged. "Hey, it's true. Anyway, did you hear? The king's scouts spotted dragons in the northern mountains." "Dragons?" Mason froze mid-motion. "But they haven't been seen in Tylon for generations." "That's what makes it strange," she said. "Father says the castle's on alert. The king even called a war council. Dragons, in their world, weren't mere beasts. They were primordial beings, forces of nature with thought and will, older than any kingdom. Mason had grown up hearing tales of their power, their wisdom, and the destruction they once brought. But for centuries they had vanished, reduced to myths and symbols on banners. What could bring them back now? Mason wondered aloud. Ree didn't answer. Soon work consumed them both again. By midday, Mason was leading the horses to the paddock when a vast shadow passed overhead. He thought it was a cloud, until he saw the stablemaster and workers frozen, eyes fixed on the sky. Mason followed their gaze, and felt his heart skip. The creature was enormous, its scales shifting from emerald to midnight blue as it glided through the air. The beating of its wings sent gusts strong enough to flatten grass. "Inside!" the stablemaster shouted. But before anyone could move, 5 more shapes darkened the sky. 6 dragons now circled the castle, blotting out the sun and drenching the courtyard in twilight. Chaos erupted, guards shouting orders, bells clanging across the city. But Mason stood rooted to the spot. The horses panicked, pulling at their reins, but he couldn't move. Then the largest of them descended, scales of glowing copper reflecting the sun like liquid fire. The earth trembled beneath its landing, crushing decades of royal gardens in a single step. The others followed, taking positions around the castle. Panic spread like wildfire, but Mason couldn't look away. Something in the copper dragon's gaze held him captive. Those eyes, ancient, intelligent, almost searching. Its gaze swept across nobles, guards, and knights, and then locked on Mason, and in that instant an impossible voice filled his mind, deep and echoing, like mountains shifting. "At last," it said, "we have found you, dragon speaker." Mason staggered back. The dragon was speaking, not aloud but directly into his thoughts. Before he could react, the others turned their attention to him too. More voices thundered in his head. "The bloodline endures," said a silver-scaled dragon. "He is untrained, unaware," murmured another. "But he is the one," declared the copper dragon. "The signs are unmistakable." What are you talking about?" Mason whispered. By then, the castle guards had formed up in tight ranks. Arrows were drawn, shields raised. From a high balcony, King Harlow appeared, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Dragons of the ancient realms," he called, "why have you broken the old pact and entered the lands of men?" The copper dragon turned its head toward the king, but no sound escaped its jaws. Only Mason heard the reply, a voice like thunder echoing in his mind. "We come for the dragon speaker. The time of reckoning draws near, and he must be made ready." They're here for me," Mason said, his voice trembling but firming as the words left his lips. Nearby guards turned to stare at him like he'd lost his mind. King Harlow's brow furrowed. What madness is this? Dragons have not spoken to man since the Great Severance. The copper dragon lowered its head until its enormous golden eye was level with the king's balcony. "You hear nothing because you are not meant to," the voice rumbled through Mason's thoughts. "Only the dragon speaker can bridge our worlds now, king of stone nests." Mason felt something unseen tugging at him, a pull deep within his chest. His body began to move on its own, his feet carrying him past the rows of guards and into the open courtyard. Knight Commander Garrett seized his arm. "Get back to the stables, boy! This is no place for servants!" Mason met Garrett's eyes, and for the first time, he didn't flinch. "Let go of me." Something in his tone, or perhaps the spark in his eyes, made Garrett's grip falter. The commander stepped back without another word. Mason kept walking until he stood before the copper dragon itself. Up close, the creature was breathtaking, every scale the size of a shield, gleaming like molten metal. Heat radiated from its body in waves, searing the air between them. "I don't understand," Mason said aloud. "I'm nobody, just a stable boy." The dragon's vast head dipped lower, nostrils flaring as it inhaled his scent. In the reflection of its molten eye, Mason saw himself, small, frightened, but somehow chosen. "You are Dragon Speaker," the voice said, deep and resonant. "Last of an ancient bloodline. Your ancestors stood between dragonkind and mankind, preserving balance and peace. When that line was thought broken, we withdrew from your world. But the blood has resurfaced in you, and not a moment too soon." "What bloodline?" Mason whispered. "My parents were servants. They died in the fever when I was 4. They cared for you," came a gentler voice. "The silver dragons. But they were not your true parents. You were hidden for your protection." Mason's world spun. Everything he had ever believed about his life, his family, his place, was unraveling in seconds. And yet, deep down, something inside him knew their words were true. He had always felt different. Protected. From what? He asked quietly. "From those who would destroy the last dragon speaker before he could awaken to his purpose," the copper dragon answered. "The same darkness that now threatens both our kinds." By now, King Harlow had descended into the courtyard, flanked by his royal guard. Beside him walked Magister Thorn, the royal wizard, his staff humming with restrained power. "What is the meaning of this?" the king demanded. "Boy, explain yourself." Mason turned to face him. It was the first time he had ever spoken directly to his king. "Your Majesty, the dragons say they came for me. They say I'm something called a dragon speaker." Magister Thorn's expression drained of color. "Impossible," he rasped. "That bloodline was extinguished during the Mage Wars over 300 years ago." "You are mistaken, Spellweaver," the copper dragon's voice boomed through Mason's mind. Instinctively, Mason translated aloud. "The dragon says you're wrong. The bloodline survived." The wizard's eyes widened. "You can hear them? Truly hear?" Mason nodded. King Harlow looked between his wizard and the stable boy, his confusion plain. "Magister Thorn, what is a dragon speaker?" The old wizard leaned heavily on his staff, his voice low and heavy with memory. "In the First Age, before kingdoms rose, there were humans born with the gift to commune with dragonkind. They served as the bridge between our species, mediators of peace. The last known dragon speaker was slain when the dark mage Corvus sought to enslave dragon magic. As Thorn spoke, flashes of memory, not his own, surged through Mason's mind. He saw humans standing before dragons just as he was now. He felt their power, their connection, the ancient bond that once united two worlds. "The dragons say a great threat is coming," Mason said suddenly. "Something that endangers both dragons and humans alike." Magister Thorn's gaze sharpened. "What threat?" Before Mason could reply, the courtyard darkened. A new shadow fell across them, heavier, colder than before. A seventh dragon descended from the clouds. Its scales were blacker than night, swallowing light instead of reflecting it. Unlike the others, its movements were jerky, unnatural, wrong. Noctis. The copper dragon's voice came tight and grim. "He has been taken." The black dragon landed with a thunderous crash that cracked the courtyard stone. Guards lifted their weapons, but the king held up his hand. Fear rolled through the air, not just from humans, but from the dragons themselves. "What's wrong with him?" Mason asked. "Not him. Noctis," the copper dragon said. "He was the eldest of our council, the wisest among us, but he has been corrupted." Noctis's eyes locked onto Mason, but they held no wisdom, no light, only hunger. When he spoke, his voice was a warped chorus, as if many were speaking through him at once. "So this is the last dragon speaker, so fragile. My master will be pleased when I bring him your heart." Mason stumbled back. "Who is your master?" The black dragon's maw split open, revealing jagged fangs like shards of obsidian. A rasping laugh spilled out, echoing through the courtyard. "The void approaches, little speaker, the hunger between worlds. My master has consumed countless realms, and now his gaze falls upon yours. First the dragons, then all that lives." The copper dragon surged forward, wings flaring as it shielded Mason with its enormous body. "He has been consumed by the void. There is nothing left of Noctis within that shell." The copper dragon's voice trembled with grief, and then the black dragon struck. It lunged forward, jaws snapping toward the copper's throat. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Guards scattered like leaves in a storm. The king was rushed back into the castle, and the ground trembled beneath the clash of titans. Windows shattered across the castle. A cloud of darkness tore itself free from Noctis's body, swirling like a living storm before dissolving into nothing. When the light faded, a smaller dragon collapsed to the ground, its scales no longer black, but shimmering silver-white like moonlit glass. Noctis was free. Mason's knees buckled. His body felt hollow, his energy spent. As darkness crept into his vision, he heard the copper dragon's voice, filled with awe. "In all our histories, never has a dragon speaker purged the void's corruption. You are more than we hoped for," Mason read. And then, the world went black. When Aeson awoke, everything was still. For a moment he thought he'd dreamed it all, until the aching in his muscles reminded him it was real. He was no longer lying on straw, but on a four-poster bed draped in silk and velvet. Sunlight filtered softly through tall curtains. "He's awake," came Rhee's voice. She rushed to his bedside, her usual stoic expression breaking into sheer relief. "You absolute idiot," she said, though her tone was warm. "What were you thinking, facing that thing?" Mason tried to sit up, but pain shot through his body and he sank back against the pillows. "Where am I?" "The east wing of the castle," said another voice. Magister Thorn stepped into view, leaning on his staff but with newfound respect in his eyes. "These chambers are reserved for royal advisors." "Advisors?" Mason frowned weakly. "I'm just—" Thorn interrupted with a faint smile. "Not anymore, Dragon Speaker. Not anymore." "Why am I here?" Mason asked, confusion still fogging his mind. "Because, young man," came the king's voice as he stepped in behind the wizard, "you're clearly much more than just a stable boy." Mason struggled upright again, this time with Rhee's steady hand supporting him. He tried to bow, But King Harlow waved the gesture away. "There's no need for that. Not from the man who saved my kingdom from a threat I didn't even comprehend." The king came closer, his tone softer now. "The dragons still circle above the castle. They refuse to leave without you. Magister Thorn's limited spell confirms they mean no harm. They're waiting." "How long was I unconscious?" Mason asked quietly. 3 days, Reese answered, relief flickering across her face. "You nearly didn't make it. Whatever you did out there, it almost killed you." Mason shut his eyes, recalling the surge of raw power that had flooded through him. "I don't understand it," he murmured. "It was like I knew exactly what to do, without knowing how." "Ancestral memory," Thorn explained. "The knowledge of dragon speakers past lies dormant in your blood, surfacing when needed." "But who am I really?" Mason asked. "The dragons said my parents and the ones who raised me weren't truly mine." The king and wizard exchanged a long, heavy glance. Then Harlow spoke. "There are truths you deserve to hear, Mason Reed. Or rather, Mason Draonis, last living heir to the royal house of Draonis, rulers of these lands before my line took the throne." Mason froze, disbelief washing over him. "That's impossible. I'm nobody. I clean stalls." "You were hidden in plain sight," Thorn explained gently. "When House Draonis was destroyed 17 years ago, rumors spread that the queen gave birth before she died. My father, King Harlow's father, ordered a search, not to harm the child, but to protect it. He understood the importance of your bloodline, even if its connection to dragons had faded from memory. When no heir was found," King Harlow added, "the story was dismissed as legend, but clearly the queen's child survived, hidden among the servants." "Why hide me there?" Mason asked. "For your safety," the wizard replied. "Who would suspect a royal heir shoveling hay in a stable? And it worked, until your powers awakened and the dragons found you." Mason tried to absorb it all. A royal lineage, a bond with dragons, the corrupted Noctis, the mention of a master, something called the Void. Thorn's face darkened. "Yes, the dragons told us more. The Void isn't a being. It's a force, a devourer of magic that exists between worlds. It feeds on life, and dragons hold the greatest magic of all. Somehow the Void has breached our realm." "The corruption of Noctis was just the beginning," said King Harlow gravely. "They believe it was a test, the first move in something much larger, and they need you, Dragon Speaker, to help them stop it." "Me?" Mason blinked. "I don't even know what I did that day. I don't know how to be a dragon speaker." "But you did it," Reese reminded him softly. "You did something the dragons themselves thought impossible." A guard appeared at the doorway, bowing low. "Your Majesty, the copper dragon requests the dragon speaker's presence in the courtyard. It says the matter is urgent." King Harlow turned to Mason. "Are you strong enough?" He wasn't sure, but he nodded anyway. Reese helped him up. Someone had dressed him in deep blue silk embroidered with silver, colors so fine he'd never have dared touch them before. "The colors of House Draonis," the king noted. "Blue for the skies, silver for dragon scales." As Mason walked through the castle halls, every servant and soldier turned to watch. The stable boy who once mucked stalls now walked among kings, and the dragons waited for him. In the courtyard, 7 dragons stood in a solemn semicircle. The copper dragon was at the center, its wounds already knitting. Beside it, Noctis, smaller now, freed from corruption, lowered his head in respect. Then, one by one, every dragon bowed. "They're bowing to you," Reese whispered. "Why?" Mason asked, directing the thought toward the copper dragon. "Because you have done what none before you could," came the calm reply in his mind. "You purged the Void's corruption and restored one of our own. That has never happened in all of Dragonkind's history." "I just did what felt right," Mason said quietly. "That instinct is your gift," a silver dragon added. "But instinct alone won't be enough for what's coming. You'll need training and strength." Mason looked around, at the dragons, the king, the wizard, and Reese beside him. 3 days ago, he'd been a nameless servant. Now, ancient beings bowed before him, and a king called him royalty. "What comes next?" he asked. "War," the copper dragon answered, voice grave. "The void has tasted our world and found it rich with magic. Noctis's corruption was only a probe. More will follow. We must be ready." "And you need me for this," Mason said. "But I'm no warrior. I've never even held a sword." "You are more than a warrior, Mason Draonis," the dragon replied. "You are the bridge between mankind and dragonkind, the bond that must hold if both are to survive. The power within you has only just begun to awaken." Mason thought of everything. His lost heritage, the dragons, the power that nearly destroyed him. The boy who once dreamed of adventure had found it, only far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. "I don't know if I can be what you need," he admitted softly. The copper dragon's mind voice warmed with approval. "That is enough, young dragon speaker. Willingness is the first step, and the most important." King Harlow stepped forward. "Then hear this. If war is coming, House Silva stands with House Draonis and the dragons." Magister Thorn bowed in agreement, eyes gleaming. "The Order of Mages will study this threat and prepare our defenses," Thorn declared firmly. "And I'll make sure he doesn't do anything reckless again," Reese added, giving Mason's arm a quick squeeze. Mason looked from face to face, the wizard, the king, Reese, and then back to the line of waiting dragons. The road before him was dark and uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he didn't feel small or alone. He had allies, powerful, ancient, and loyal. "When do we begin?" he asked. The copper dragon's deep, resonant voice echoed through his mind with both approval and urgency. "Now, dragon speaker. We begin now." As if to underline those words, a low rumble shuddered across the sky. But there were no clouds, no sign of any storm. Mason knew, and so did the dragons. It wasn't thunder. Somewhere, far beyond sight, the barrier between worlds was cracking. The void was testing the boundaries of reality. The stable boy who had become a dragon speaker drew in a steadying breath and squared his shoulders. Whatever came next, he would face it head on. The dragons had bowed to him, not out of fear, but out of recognition. They had seen what he could become. Now it was up to him to live up to that faith. With the dragons beside him and his allies standing firm, Mason took his first step toward destiny. From a forgotten servant to the leader their world would soon desperately need. 3 days later. The first attack came while Mason was still learning the limits of his newfound power. He sat cross-legged atop the castle's eastern tower, facing the copper dragon, Ignis. The dragon perched on the ancient battlements, massive wings folded like living bronze walls. "Focus on the connection between us," Ignis instructed, his voice echoing in Mason's thoughts. "Feel the tether that binds dragon speaker to dragon." Mason closed his eyes, centering himself. A warmth pulsed at the edge of his consciousness, Ignis's essence. Since awakening his powers, Mason had begun to sense each dragon differently. Ignis felt like a roaring hearthfire. Noctis carried the cool calm of night air, and Lunara, the silver dragon, was like moonlight dancing on still water. "I can feel it," Mason murmured. "But how do I use it?" "The bond allows more than speech," Ignis replied. "At its height, it lets us share strength, senses, even magic itself. Your ancestors could soar through our eyes while their bodies stood upon the earth." Mason tried to imagine that, and suddenly his vision twisted. He gasped. He was staring down at himself, a small figure sitting on the tower stones below. "I can see through your eyes," he exclaimed, awe in his voice. "Good," Ignis said, pleased. "Now reach deeper. Feel the fire that burns within me." Mason extended his awareness further along the invisible thread binding them. Beyond Ignis's thoughts, he felt it, a wellspring of molten power, ancient and alive. Dragonfire magic. But before he could explore further, Ignis's head snapped toward the northern horizon. His mind voice sharpened. Something comes, something wrong. Without warning, Ignis launched himself into the air, his massive wings shaking the tower beneath Mason's feet. The other 6 dragons took flight moments later, forming a gleaming formation high above the castle. Mason ran to the edge of the parapet, squinting into the bright blue sky. At first, nothing. Then he saw it. A growing black stain on the horizon, moving too fast to be a storm cloud. "Void spawn," came Noctis's grim voice in his mind. "The corruption that once consumed me now takes shape." Mason reached out mentally to all 7 dragons. "What do we do?" "We fight," Ignis replied, his tone steady as stone. "And you, dragon speaker, must guide both dragons and men. The void will come for you first. It fears what you are becoming." Alarm bells blared across the castle walls. Soldiers and townsfolk scrambled as lookouts spotted the incoming threat. Mason sprinted down the spiral stairwell and burst into the main courtyard, where King Harlow was already commanding the defense. "It's something the dragons call void spawn," Mason explained breathlessly. "Creatures made of anti-magic. Corruption given flesh." Magister Thorn appeared beside him, face pale. "Ancient records mention such beings. The void shapes them from the twisted essence of magical creatures it has devoured in other worlds." "How do we destroy them?" the king demanded. "With great difficulty," Thorn admitted. "Magic barely harms them. Steel and dragonfire, that's our best chance." "Then steel and fire they shall face, HFY," the king declared, turning to his commander. Sir Garrett, the knight who once mocked Mason as a low-born boy, now looked at him with quiet respect. He saluted the king, then, to Mason's surprise, gave him a brief nod before racing to his post. The black mass was nearly upon them now. Mason could see shapes writhing within it, twisted, shifting horrors that defied logic, their limbs bending wrong, their bodies devouring light itself. Panic erupted in the town below. Families ran for the castle gates, but there wasn't time. The void spawn were too fast. "Ignis!" Mason cried in his mind. "The townspeople! They won't make it!" "We see them," Ignis answered. 3 dragons broke formation immediately, sweeping down between the void spawn and the fleeing villagers, forming a living wall of scales and fire. The others roared and dove headlong into the heart of the swarm. Flames erupted across the sky, white, gold, and crimson, consuming dozens of abominations. But still, more came. Up close, they were worse, vaguely human in outline, but their flesh shimmered like holes torn in reality. Wherever they touched, life withered. Wood turned to ash, stone crumbled. "They drain the life from everything," Noctis warned. "Do not let them touch human flesh." The swarm split into multiple clusters, darting toward different parts of the town. The dragons were forced to divide their forces, and their power weakened. "They're acting with strategy," Mason realized. "Something is guiding them." "The void itself," Ignis grunted as he tore through another wave. "It learns, adapts. It has devoured countless worlds before this one." "Then we can't just hold them off," Noctis said grimly. "We must find the breach, the rift, where they're entering our world." "How?" Mason demanded. Lunara's cool voice answered him. "Through you. Your ancestors could extend their minds beyond the veil, into the spaces between worlds where magic flows. If you can find the breach, we can seal it." "I don't know how," Mason protested. "You must try," Ignis urged. "If you don't, this will be only the first of many." Magister Thorn turned toward him, eyes shadowed with concern. "The old texts speak of dragon speakers linking their minds to several dragons at once, entering what they called the communion of flame. It's incredibly dangerous. A human mind isn't built to contain so much dragon awareness at once." "But it could work," Reese said quietly. "It might," Thorn admitted. "Or it might destroy him completely." Mason looked out at the sky, where dragons and darkness clashed in fire and death, and clenched his fists. The impact hit Mason like a storm of ice and shadow. Darkness poured into him, cold and merciless, racing through his veins and clawing into his mind. The void was consuming him from within. But this time, Mason wasn't helpless. He had faced this evil before. He had purified Noctis. He knew how the corruption moved, how it fed. Instead of resisting it head-on, he caged it, building mental walls, forcing the darkness into one place. "Now!" Mason shouted, his voice echoing both aloud and through the minds of the dragons. Instantly, all 7 answered his call. Their power surged toward him, not at the crystal, but into him. Magister Thorn and his apprentices quickly shifted their spells, strengthening Mason's mental barriers, helping him hold the corruption long enough for the dragon's cleansing fire to do its work. A scream tore through the air as the final crystal cracked, its dark glow fading. The rift began to collapse, dragging the void avatar back into the nothingness from which it came. But Mason barely noticed. His mind was locked in a desperate inner war, light battling darkness with his soul caught between. Through the pain, a new warmth reached him. Not dragon, not magic, but something deeply human. "Hold on, Mason," came Rhee's voice, faint but steady, speaking through the small wooden horse in his hand, glowing softly in his palm. Somehow, her spirit had bridged the distance, lending him her courage, her will to endure. That spark of humanity, stubborn, unyielding, alive, became the edge he needed. Drawing on it, Mason hurled all his remaining strength at the heart of the darkness within. Light met shadow. A blinding flash tore through the mountains as both forces annihilated each other. The breach imploded, sealing shut. The void avatar's final words hissed in Mason's mind. "This is not the end, Dragon Speaker. We will return." Then, silence. The mountains stood still once more. Mason collapsed, barely conscious but alive. Ignis lowered his great copper head beside him. "You did it," the dragon said quietly. "The breach is sealed." "Did everyone?" Mason tried to ask, but his voice failed. "There are losses," Ignis admitted, "but far fewer than there might have been. You saved them, Mason." King Harlow appeared, battered but proud. "This victory belongs to you. The world owes you a debt beyond measure." Mason tried to smile, but darkness claimed him, this time gentle and peaceful. 2 weeks later, he stood atop the castle's highest tower. 5 dragons soared overhead, guardians of a world reborn. Noctis and Sylvan had already left to warn other dragon clans. Rhee joined him, her hand sliding into his. "Do you really have to go?" she asked softly. "Not yet," Mason said. "But soon. The void will rise again, and others must be ready. That's the path ahead." Since the battle, Mason had healed slowly. The king had named him Lord Mason Draunus, restoring an ancient title, though the name meant little to him. What mattered now was unity. Humans and dragons standing as one. "I'll come back," he promised, squeezing Rhee's hand. "I know," she smiled. "Just don't take forever. The stables are too quiet without you complaining about the mud." Mason laughed, then hugged her tightly. Ignis landed nearby, wings folding with regal grace. "It's time, young dragon speaker," the dragon rumbled. "The eastern dragons await your voice." Mason nodded. "I'm ready." As he climbed onto Ignis's back, Rhee called out, "Remember who you are, Mason Reed. Not just the dragon speaker, not just a lord. Remember the stable boy, too." Mason touched the wooden carving in his pocket and smiled. How could I forget? It was the stable boy who saved the world. Ignis launched skyward. The castle fell away beneath them, the rebuilt town gleaming in the morning sun. Mason looked out over his land, his people, and felt pride swell within him. "Ready for the next journey?" Ignis asked in his mind. Mason grinned. "Lead the way." As they soared toward the distant mountains, the wind in his hair and hope in his heart, Mason knew this wasn't the end, only the beginning. The dragons had bowed to him, but not for his magic, for the spirit of humanity he carried, that unbreakable will, that courage to rise from nothing. And that, Mason thought, was a power worth protecting, in this world and every world yet to come.